Welcome back to The Explainer, brought to you by Forge College. Today, we're jumping right into broadcasting transactions and handling errors. We've got a really thrilling mission today, actually. We're finally taking that locally signed transaction, the one we've been so carefully crafting, and we are sending it out into the wild Ethereum network. We're leaving the safe, cozy, isolated environment of our local machines and stepping right into the bustling, chaotic reality of the global mempool. It's time to see if our creation can actually survive contact with the real blockchain. But, well, before we get too excited, let me introduce you to the ultimate gatekeeper. Picture this. Error, nonce too low. I don't know who you think you are, but you're out of order. Yeah, that is the voice of a grumpy Ethereum node. Think of the node as this incredibly pedantic, highly bureaucratic machine. Honestly, it doesn't care how hard you worked on your code. It demands absolute 100% cryptographic and procedural perfection. And since we're the diagnostic mechanics here, it's our job to give it exactly what it wants without completely losing our cool. So here's our roadmap for taming this node today. First, into the network reality. 2, meet your grumpy node. 3, fixing the big 4. 4, building a retry loop. 5, replace versus resign. And finally, 6, success and next steps. Let's get right to work. All right, section 1, into the network reality. Let's quickly look at the life cycle of a transaction. Just to ground us in where we are in our previous steps, we successfully configured our clusters and wallets. Then we created our signed raw transaction. Remember, that's the RLP encoded artifact. It's basically a serialized byte payload carrying all your transaction fields, plus those critical signature components V, R, and S. We verified it all, saved it as a pristine hex string, and now we're at step 3, broadcast to network. We're grabbing that exact byte payload we signed locally and throwing it over the fence to see if it survives the harsh realities of network policies, gas limits, and super strict ordering. Moving right along to section 2, meet your grumpy nodes and how we handle network submission. To actually talk to this node, we use a very specific method. It's called eth_send raw transaction. You can kind of think of this as the JSON-RPC mail slot. This right here is the exact boundary where cryptographic correctness meets network reality. We take our carefully formatted signed hex string and we slide it right into the slot. Now, if the node likes it, awesome. It accepts it gracefully. But if anything, and I mean literally anything, is out of place, it's going to spit back a nasty JSON error object. Which brings us to basically the most important question of this entire explainer. What actually happens when the node just flat out says no? Look, your first instinct is probably going to be to panic, or maybe just blindly resend the transaction over and over, hoping the node magically changes its mind. Please don't do that. We really need to shift our mindset here from panic to routine mechanical diagnosis. The node is actually doing us a huge favor. It's telling us exactly what's wrong. We just need to know how to listen to it. That brings us to section 3, fixing the big 4. Let's look at the most common error responses. Okay, consider this your ultimate diagnostic matrix. Parsing the node's JSON-RPC error message tells you exactly which wrench you need to turn. Let's break them down. First up, nonce too low. This happens because your transaction nonce is lower than the account's current nonce at the node. Usually that means a previous transaction already used it up. Second, replacement transaction underpriced. This means you're trying to replace a pending transaction, but your new gas price just isn't high enough to incentivize the node to actually care. Third, insufficient funds. Pretty self-explanatory, right? Your sender balance simply cannot cover the value you're trying to send, plus the maximum gas cost. And fourth, invalid signature. This means either your verification failed, your V, R, and S values are somehow malformed, or maybe you just used the wrong chain ID. So the absolutely crucial point here is knowing the exact minimal repair actions needed for each of those specific errors. Got a nonce mismatch? You've got to resync the nonce by querying eth_transaction count and explicitly checking the pending state. Dealing with an underpriced replacement? You need to increase the fee by the node's minimum policy, which is usually a 10% bump. For insufficient funds, look, whatever you do, do not write a script that automatically depletes your funds trying to fix it. Just stop the script, and if you're on a testnet, go manually top up the account. And for invalid signatures, you need to thoroughly verify your chain ID during the signature generation process before you even think about re-signing. Remember our golden rule here. We do not do blind retries. We do targeted, deterministic fixes. All right, section 4, building a retry loop. Let's talk about deterministic retries. Since we know exactly how to fix these predictable errors, we can actually automate the diagnosis. We can build a simple submission helper script, maybe in Python or Node.js. Let's look at the pseudocode logic of a smart, deterministic retry loop. Step 1, we attempt the initial broadcast of our hex string. Step 2, if the JSON-RPC returns a success result, boom, we instantly print the transaction hash and exit. We win. Step 3, but if we get an error, we need to classify it. If it's a transient error, like a network timeout or a random 500 server error, we apply a backoff strategy. And step 4, if it's a state error, like that nonce mismatch or an underpriced replacement we just talked about, we apply those specific fixes, up to a sensible maximum number of attempts. Let me briefly define that strategy for transient errors because it is super important. It's called exponential backoff. This is absolutely crucial for dealing with temporary network hiccups or RPC rate limits. Instead of just spamming the node with requests every single millisecond, which, trust me, will just get you immediately blocked, you double the wait time after each failure. So you wait 1 second, then 2, then 4, and so on. It's essentially the polite engineering-approved way to handle temporary network weather without breaking things. Which leads us to Section 5, Replace versus Resign. Let's cover some key access distinctions. Let's compare these two approaches, because it's a critical distinction. On the left, we have replacement. This is when you use the exact same nonce, but you apply a higher fee to unstick a transaction. If you're using a transaction relay that supports replacement by fee, you don't even need the private key present to pull this off. On the right, though, we have resigning. This means you are changing the actual payload itself, like updating to a brand new nonce. Because the core data changed, it fundamentally requires private key access to generate a new signature. I literally cannot stress this enough. As diagnostic mechanics, never attempt to programmatically resign transactions in your helper script if your private keys are meant to be safely stored offline. You have to know your environment. And hey, one more thing on this. As you build these automated tools, remember that observability is everything. Always log your RPC responses, log the exact error classifications, the nonces used, the gas parameters, and literally every single retry attempt. You want to maintain crystal clear time-stamped logs. When things get complicated out there in the mempool, these logs are the essential evidence you're going to need to validate your success and to understand exactly how the node behaved. Finally, Section 6, Success and Next Steps, Validating Outcomes. It all comes down to the golden question, right? Did it actually work? I mean, how do we prove to ourselves that our artifact is safely out of our hands and actually living in the network? Well, you know you've succeeded when you see this. Checkpoint passed. You receive a clean JSON-RPC result object containing a pending transaction hash starting with 0x. A positive outcome here means either getting this hash immediately on the very first try or successfully documenting a handled error path, like dynamically bumping a fee or resyncing a nonce, that ultimately results in that beautiful transaction hash coming back to you. Once you have that hash in hand, your job at the submission boundary is officially done. So, what comes next? Well, now that our transaction is out there in the network, we have to deal with the consequences of how it actually propagates. Next up, we're going to dive deep into nonces, strict ordering constraints, and how mempools actually work under the hood across multiple clients. Make sure you keep those timestamped logs handy because, trust me, you are going to need them. So I hope you enjoyed this explainer and that you feel way more confident facing down those grumpy Ethereum nodes. Be sure to visit forge.college to learn more about this subject and tons of other amazing Web3 related topics. This explainer was brought to you by Forge College. But before you go, ask yourself, what happens if two perfectly identical transactions hit the mempool at the exact same millisecond? Stick around for our next explainer to find out. Thanks for joining and happy building.